So hello, my name is Sarah. I'm the program manager for Growing Indigenous Storytellers Fellowship. Thank you guys so much for being here. It is the last one that we're doing in this series, and I'm really excited for it. So I want to first off thank our amazing partners in this program, the Indigenous Journalists Association and APTN News. And just to let you guys know, a little bit of housekeeping at the top, we're going to do about 25 to 30 minutes of presentation, about 10 minutes of Q&A, and this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube, including the Q&A portion. So please keep that in mind with the questions that you're going to ask. You can raise your hand once the Q&A starts, or you can drop your questions in the chat and I can read them out. Or Trevor might read them or might answer them as we go. Ryan here. So Trevor Green is a member of the Cowichan Nation and is working on his PhD at York University, where his research explores the relationship between legacy media and Indigenous communities. His radio work has been featured on CBC Radio. He served as a judge for the National Newspaper Awards, and he sits on the board of J Schools Canada. Trevor also teaches journalism at Toronto Metropolitan University and Carleton University. And with that, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's a warm introduction, and I thank our few participants for coming. It's great to see you. I know it's a busy Friday before a lot of people go off work, so I appreciate your taking the time to chime in. It's interesting. I grew up in British Columbia in northern BC, on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, in the Venerable Forest in the Peace region. And it's interesting that I'm Cowichan on my mother's side, but I'm Dene Za on my father's side. And when I had to choose on my status card, which nation I would identify with, as it were, and I chose the Cowichan side because all my siblings went with the Cree the Duncan Cree community, which is in what is now northern Alberta. But I'm talking today about Indigenous sovereignty and the land back movement, and this has been on my mind a lot lately because in the recent months there's been a lot of coverage of the Cowichan decisions, as they're called, and the sort of panic that is happening around that. And this doesn't surprise me in that there always seems to be panic and worry that Indigenous people are going to come and take their private land, and it doesn't make any sense. And I've never actually really liked the word land back that much, because I think it encompasses so much more than just the return of land. It's, ice, sea, air, but also cultural memory, because so many Indigenous peoples are so connected to the land. It's kind of starting the reversal of the cultural genocide, right? That is, as it's referred to in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But whether you're looking at history or any event in the news, really one of the most reported issues in the media is the demand from Indigenous people, be it First Nation, Inuit, or Métis, for the return of land. And I will give you an example of, on my father's side, they were with my great-grandmother, who was in the residential schools, was with the Doig Nation, which kind of was put onto a reserve in the early 20th century. But after World War II, when vets returned, Indian Affairs Canada said this land should be developed for this reserve land was on rich mineral and oil land, and they said that it would be for returning war veterans, and so that reserve had to be relocated to a much poorer place. And that was then sold for oil and industrial development, which is the story of the North. And that has resulted in a huge, legal affair that has lasted a very long time. The Cowichan decision has gone on for 11 years. over 500 days of hearings, right? And I think it seems to me that like a lot of legacy media, especially in their commentaries and their editorials, they can understand why it's happening, but you also have this alarmist pushback. Like I saw an article, an opinion piece in the National Post a few days ago that industry will be discouraged as a result of the Cowichan decision. And I think this is anything but. I think industry wants uh, or if they're being honest with themselves, they can see that it will benefit um, the country. Um, but also, I think that we can't ignore the fact that Canada was built at the expense of Indigenous people. And Jesse Wente, the author who's now at and radio broadcaster who's now at TMU, described land back as land back as about the decision-making power. It's about self-determination for our people here that should include some access to the territories and resources in a more equitable fashion, and for us to have control over how that actually looks. So it is an effort to reclaim ownership and to restore what's been taken. Um, and but whether it's the Oka crisis in the 19 in 1990, which dealt to some extent with land, obviously, or the Idle No More crisis, or even looking at um, things like murdered and missing Indigenous women and the Highway of Tears. This is all related to land in some way or another because Indigenous nations are so connected to the land. Um, I have been doing a lot of research on Site C, which is in northern British Columbia. It's, I think, the fourth largest dam in Canada, and construction was started, I believe, in 2014 or 2015, and it's now in full operation. But the story of that is that it has flooded so much Indigenous land, uh, and the nations in northern British Columbia can no longer hunt or fish on the traditional territory. It's destroyed so much of the environment, and I mean, they say they have, the government says they have these laws of the duty to consult, but so often it's a sham, right? Um, and it's more than just a legal question. I mean, under Section 35 of the Constitution, we have title rights, Aboriginal rights, and treaty rights. Um, but so often, it seems to me that in the media, these are often portrayed as policy issues rather than any kind of law that you know is inherently should be followed. It's as if it's something to be discussed at a some committee meeting. And I think um, it's all very well for political leaders to like establish holidays, to rename institutions, uh, for some statues to be torn down. But I think true restitution is about returning what is stolen. And that starts not just with the land, but with resources, with so many things that were taken in the unjust treaty process, and it is right, and which rightfully belong to Indigenous people. And by the way, I can only speak for me as someone with Cowichan and Dene background. So often we treat Indigenous people in the media as these uh, like a monolithic group. Whether you're First Nations, Inuit, or Métis, you will have your own approaches to land. Like, for example, in British Columbia, you won't hear things I mean, the land being referred to as Turtle Island is nearly as much because this is an Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee creation myths that stem from that, and so I think that is something where I also see as a huge problem in legacy media and even in places like APTN sometimes, which is one of my favorite news outlets, and they do very good work. But too often, I think we treat Indigenous people as this lump. Um, some, and this includes coverage on Indigenous sovereignty and um, the land back movement. But it's interesting that I'm seeing less and less referrals to Indigenous sovereignty, and I think part of that is because the way Canada has referred to sovereignty has changed since the last election of Donald Trump, right? Um, Sovereignty has become a sort of um, a buzzword. Um, and every week I see articles about Arctic sovereignty and digital sovereignty, and there was an interesting uh, opinion piece in the Walrus uh, by where is it? Sorry. Yes, by Michelle Saika. She's a senior editor at the Walrus, or at the Narwhal, and a member of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation. Um, But in reference to Trump's comments about Canada being the 51st state, she said that for Indigenous people, Trump's threats have a familiar ring. And she said that for generations, Indigenous people have been told that assimilation is in their best interest by a nation with its hungry gaze fixed on their abundant natural resources, a capricious ally who has shown it will break treaties and agreement when convenient, unquote. So I think that there's something to be said for that. And when I uh, started to see how Canadians were understandably getting their knickers in a knot over Trump's comments, I thought, well, how do you think Indigenous people have felt um, for centuries, and um, uh, it's there have been huge economic, legal consequences. I've used the term cultural genocide, um, and really building on this theme of violence. I think that the Indigenous sovereignty, um, which is, and we often use the word like self-determination, self-governance, um, and the other buzzword is decolonizing, right? And we talk about decolonizing the newsroom, decolonizing education. An elder said to my friend, an Indigenous academic, that unless you're giving land back or some kind of resource, it's not decolonization. And I think that is actually um, like a huge statement, as it were, because so often it's when we think of reconciliation or resurgence, and again, reconciliation is, I fear, becoming a sort of buzzword as well. And so um, my hope is that with the land back movement, and whether they're journalists or policymakers or people in government, will start to explain what that means. It's not just about returning land, but it's giving people back their cultural identity, giving people back their access to language, and um, the sort of cultural memory that is being lost, and even things like digital sovereignty. In the States, they don't, more often they talk about tribal sovereignty, which is something we never hear about in terms of the Canadian. When I say Aboriginal law, not Indigenous law, which is different, but with Aboriginal law, and I hope that as someone who's worked in government, I was at Canadian Heritage um, and have spent a lot of time in academic institutions. There is so much time put into and effort into talking about the policies that could happen, right? That there's so little action, and I think that's what concerns me about the land back movement. Just as the Idle No More movement, which was very important, has it's not that it fizzled out, but like it didn't have the impact that I had hoped. Just as the MMIWG has not, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, which was released just before COVID, it kind of has fizzled out. And if you look at the 200 and some recommendations, it does mention land, but there are very few actual concrete things. The only thing that I could find in reviewing it was something called the Empowerment Fund, which hasn't happened. Like if you look at all the recommendations that they made, the only actual one of the one things that wasn't wishy-washy is something called the Empowerment Fund, a permanent empowerment fund. That hasn't happened yet, and it's what, 7 years later. And so it's really this. There's a British saying that fine words butter no parsnips, and I think the story of reconciliation, whether it's sovereignty, decolonization, or that, or anything, any of that kind of thing, it's just a continuation of the uh, dispossession project, as it were. And what's interesting is that I did my master's degree in history, and the more I studied Canadian history and looked at Indigenous issues, the more it seemed to me that it was this idea of the provinces and the federal government arguing about who is the burden of who is to deal with this burden, right? And I think things are changing, but this has like Murray Sinclair said, this is only it took 7 generations for us to get to the mess that we're in, and it's going to take 7 generations for us to get out. And I'd like to say that I'm really optimistic, but I remember I was 11 years old when the Royal Aboriginal Peoples Commission report came out. Most of those recommendations haven't taken place, right? There was an article by Tanya Talaga in the Globe and Mail recently, and she talked about how little of the TRC recommendations or the calls to action have come into place. I've just talked about the lack of MMIWG initiatives that have taken place, and even the one substantial, actual, tangible thing hasn't happened. I believe there will be an inquiry in 15 years as to why the TRC hasn't, you know, why more hasn't been done. Like there will be another inquiry, and inquiries are all very well, but they don't lead to action. And um, uh, whether it's the courts or whether it's Parliament, something has to change, and media can play a part in that. But that means hiring more Indigenous reporters. It means making sure that Indigenous reporters are able to work in management and become editors and have an impact on policy. This hasn't happened. In fact, we're going in the opposite direction. Um, uh, 70, I think it was 77% of um, people in newsrooms are white European, non-Indigenous uh, people, and if about 5 years ago it was less than that, and so we're actually going in an opposite direction, and that is not good news. I recently finished teaching the Foundations of Journalism course for the Carleton certificate in journalism in Indigenous communities, and I had about 20 very bright Indigenous students from across, um, I'll say Turtle Island, and it does give me hope in a huge way that there are now programs like this, and that we are organizing, talks like this. But if we don't have constant effort taken on, not just by Indigenous people and allies and activists, but by the public as a whole, we're not going to work. And the costs are huge. I mean, I haven't even talked about climate change and the way land back and Indigenous sovereignty will help climate change. Indigenous people will be some of the most affected, and yet it's their very outlook and the way they treat the land as a living being that will help Canadians develop policies that will lead to like meaningful impact. So yeah, I don't want to be all pessimistic, but as someone who studies media and Indigenous stories in a big way, I do get concerned that that um, we're losing time, as it were. And that's why I am encouraged by things like the Cowichan decision, which will come with more turmoil, and there's going to be appeals. But um, uh, it is steps in the right direction, and this all stands on the giants. You know, it stands on the shoulders of the activists who go back, you know, for decades. You know, from the white paper and the red paper in 1969 on onwards. This did not happen overnight, and we have so much work to do. But yeah, I think, Sarah, I will open it up for questions there
Yeah, no, that makes
because
sense.
we have such a small, intimate group. I'd love to hear what other people think of
Yeah.
the idea of land back. Does anyone have any questions about what? Oh yeah, Ryan.
Yeah. Hi. Hey, Trevor. Thank you so much for that. Actually, technically, I live in Toronto as well, so I'll be heading back there in a few months
Oh nice.
for this fellowship.
Are you in Vancouver now?
Yeah, I've been in the Vancouver
Yeah, I
office.
thought so. I thought so.
Yeah. Currently in Edmonton though.
Ah. Are you
Uh,
anywhere near? Are you near White Ave?
oh, I grew up on White Ave.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought so.
But I'm not there. My parents live further south now, but yeah, that's where I grew up. Um, Chianti's I worked at for over a decade. If you ever went there.
Yes, yes.
Um, well, yeah, I mean, I had to do some interviews of local property owners in that fucking Cowichan trial
Mm,
about 2 months ago, and having to bite my tongue of this rich white woman who has this huge, beautiful like ranch, but her condo, one of the investment properties is on that.
yeah.
And to hear her just literally just start slinging conspiracy theories. She was mega right out of the box.
Yes.
And but then also like oh I just feel sorry for all those like first time condo buyers. That's our investment. Like if we had to just walk away, we could. And it's like, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you unpack that just one sentence right there?
No, absolutely.
And then having to smile and nod and try to get the good sound clip and trying to get a biased, interview that we can use. And um, but it was wild, yeah, to see the uproar, to see the minute, and of course it was stoked. Like that the mayor of Richmond just absolutely did everything to make it the worst possible situation
No,
because he's such a horrible mayor. Like it was the awe and distract that we see so much of now in politics. Um, and it was really interesting how and watching all the other news outlets report on it, purposely stoking fears. Like everything was about stoking fears in that and still is to that point.
I think you're absolutely right. It was either about stoking fears or very reasonable. Like there didn't seem to be any in between.
Yeah,
Like you know,
yeah.
it seemed like the Narwhal published some very great articles, and so did the Globe actually. But there was no in between. Like there was, it
You're
was
right.
like it
Yeah.
was so like we're so polarized.
Yeah. And even EB, like he was like super calm. And kind of like actually kind of said, well, like we're glad that they've sued, that it's gone to trial because like I felt like the message that was kept on continually being lost or the sound bites that were always edited out was this is just the process. It has been an 11-year process. It will be a process. We're establishing protocol. Yeah, it was really interesting how and we're in the very middle of this whole process, whatever it ends up being too. It's going to be a lot longer. Um, I think the one thing that pushed through for me, that seems to be used to stoke fears, but then there's no real answer was, uh, the ability for people there now to get mortgages
Yeah.
because there is a question. But I think he even said he's like, well, like we have something for that. Like we have like protocols to support people. And no one actually said you're not going to lose, other than the Cowichan tribe article that
Yeah.
came out a little later. Nobody said we're not taking your land. Like there's land claims that have set precedent across the country.
Yes, and that's the other thing. I don't see why they haven't talked about things that have gone on in other parts of the country that
Yeah.
uh, answer these questions, or at least speak to a reasonable process.
Show examples of how like whenever someone would talk to me, I would immediately and then that conspiracy woman, we were chatting beforehand and I was just throwing down stuff that I know and she's like, why doesn't anybody tell us this? I'm like the Mississauga is the Credit River. Like they did a land claim. They rightfully owned Toronto Island. They didn't get Toronto Island back. They got
Hmm.
$300 million and now they're building skyscrapers. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
And so and she's like, why doesn't anybody tell us this? Like why?
No, no, exactly. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rose, you've got a question.
Um, yeah, I had also preface, sorry, I have like the worst flu, so if I talking I'll try to form my thoughts. My brain's a bit slow today, but I what about the like talking about I just had a comment and then a question after, but like about land back and it being it's so much more than that. I like often experience with non-Indigenous people that I've talked to about land back and they're like, "Well, I don't know what you guys are asking for. Like where are we gonna go if we what do you mean give it back to where what happens to us or so we're supposed to like leave or like and like it's not like you said it's not like that's not it's so much more than that and it's not just that's not the point of that. I was just wondering what you would like recommend in response to like a a question like that and how to respond to that in like an impactful way and in a direct way, like what can we offer? What kind of information can we offer? Because I don't really I'm not sure how to respond in situations like that.
I think you should tell that we're coming for their homes, and that they'll be kicked out. They'll be evicted by Monday. And I think you should, say that you've spoken to the bank and
Oh,
uh,
and their RRSPs are next.
yeah, exactly, and a tax-free savings account. No, I think you could. Well, it depends on how reasonable you want to be. Like, there's so many myths. Like, there's like the you could point out this myth that Indigenous people don't pay taxes. They yes, they do. They pay a lot of taxes. Like, uh, or that all Indigenous people get free education, and you can say that this idea, that this myth that you are going to suddenly lose your home, or it's just fear mongering, and that you're catastrophizing, and it's important to listen, to what people are saying.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I also had just one more question about um like how uh you were saying that there's like you've been seeing more like indigenous emerging like writers and people that are wanting to like make an impact. And I was wondering like in regards to like if for example if there's a newsroom that is if there's a newsroom that is like indigenous led but there's 70% of them of the people that work in that for that company that are non-indigenous, do you think is that an like do you is
I
that an
think that
issue?
they're like white, and it's not just that they're not indigenous. Like, they're like 77% of people in newsrooms are white, is what I'm saying.
Right. Do you see that that is improving with like the more indigenous like writers and journalists coming through? Like, do you see that that's going to be an improvement?
I think it is going to improve, but the numbers are, from what I understand from the journalism.
The Canadian Association of Journalists.
Yeah, that's it. I confuse the two foolishly. It's actually not going in the right direction, the numbers.
Okay.
Uh, but I also think that I know a lot of Indigenous journalists who, well, I mean, a number of them who will go to work at the public broadcaster like CBC, but they just don't feel supported, and that's a problem. And I think part of it is I think there aren't enough CBC Indigenous journalists at the management level, you know. And it's the same. It's the same like at Indian Affairs Canada, like that you have Indigenous people working at the lowest jobs, you know, and non-Indigenous people are the ones that rise in the department, and I think that's a huge problem. And it's the same, but also, yeah, I think, but it's like in academia, Indigenous people. There's been a huge push to get more Indigenous people in academia, and they leave after a few years because they're tokenized. They're expected to take on to do all this stuff and not have the resources. So it's very tricky though, because I also know that journalism as an industry, of course, is facing. I mean, it's a cliche to say this, is facing all sorts of financial problems, obviously. Though that is also getting a little bit better, actually. I think with the Google, or at least like I've had the editor of the Toronto Star come and talk to my class, Nicole McIntyre, and like Justin Ling, and they said that there is starting to see more of a ripple effect from things like the deal that Google did with the Online News Act, and there is actually it is getting a little bit better, you know. Oh yes, Ryan.
I've heard some people talk about land back, um, which helps when discussing it with people, muggles, whatever. That to start off by saying it's a metaphor. Like we're obviously not saying give us the whole country back, but it is a metaphor for what was taken, what was promised, what never showed up. And like you said, these weren't policy. I love that. I love that line that you said. These weren't policy decisions. These were legal contracts.
Yeah.
And the great thing about the English is they documented everything. So when we go into these land, they know it's going to take 30 years through the courts, but the proof is there. Um, and there's another great quote from a landmark case about 20 years ago in BC. I can't remember. It's the name of a book, beautiful book. It says, and one of the elders came in. They were trying to justify that their village had been there forever in the valley, which had a mountain fall onto it about hundreds of years ago. And eventually, through this decades-long land claim case, archaeologists found it eventually.
Yeah.
And one of the elders brought in, his quote was, "If this is your land, where are your stories?"
Yes.
And
Yes.
it was such a beautiful quote to connect history and to a place. And I feel like that's a really interesting sort of cerebral concept when you try to put that on top of like the treaties.
Yeah.
And like that is the story of the land, and that's the first chapter of the settlers coming into this story. And I find it helps contextualize it a bit mentally.
Absolutely. And storytelling and the land is so woven together, in a way that, I mean, no wonder we have lost some of our culture. I mean, so much of our cultural memory because we have had that, or we have survived despite that, obviously, but you know, at what cost? Um, you know, it's but I I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about memory lately, and I think, I mean, our memories are stories, and but the fact that we can remember something, that means we've survived it, and so that the very act of remembering it is a sort of like a sign of hope, you know. Um, I
Hmm.
think.
Are there any other questions? I've got one just because we do have a little bit of time. And if anybody has like my questions are not the important ones here. So if anybody has one, please either drop it in the chat or say it and we can skip to that. But so you said that line that you said about like unless you're handing over resources, it's not
Mhm.
reconciliation. Would reparations be a reframing that
I
might be useful?
I said decolonization.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Yes,
no, no.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Or sorry. So I guess my question is like reparations instead of reconciliation, because I absolutely agree. Like I don't think that word means much.
yes,
Any, like
I,
it's
I agree with Eve Tuck wrote a wonderful article that's often like it's been cited so many times called "Decolonization is not a metaphor," um, and she said that when we use language like decolonization, it's the settlers' move to innocence, and I put a lot of stock in that, and I would be all right with the um, what was the word you used?
reparations.
Reparations, though that also might have problematic historical, uh, people might get their
Mhm.
knickers in a knot over that. But um, you could also call it like the right thing to do. uh, uh, you know, but I mean, I often like I often have said to non-Indigenous people, like think if you could like think of some of the things that like having your children taken away and put in a residential school or like uh in the case of the Inuit, like a plane would come and like take your children, and pick them up on a plane and take them away and you wouldn't see them again. Like, could you imagine that? And I think it's hard for a lot of non-Indigenous people to kind of think about uh things like intergenerational trauma. It's just not in their uh capacity, as it were. And I understand. I mean, it's this is human nature, but I think that it's important to remind them of these things, no matter how painful it is. And I also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
One thing that's been popping up more and more is the denialism.
Oh gosh, yeah, it pisses me off in the
Yeah.
yeah. It's um, and it's a like it's a concerted effort, and these people seem to work in tandem with one another, and they write forwards to one another's books, and publish op-eds, and um, I'll say that they're organized. I will give them that, but it's just um, uh, it's uh, it's very concerning, and um, I almost wish that there was some kind of I don't know what the answer is there.
Is it the I don't know what's happening with this hate bill that's been going through the courts for a long time now, but it seems like it's coming to some kind of potential. And does that do you have any context of how denialism of residential schools would fall under that?
That's just not. That's kind of outside of my
Yeah,
area, if that
right,
makes
right.
sense.
Yeah, no, totally.
Uh, I know that, for example, denying the Holocaust in Canada is illegal. Uh, but I I don't know what the
Yeah.
answer is there about how to handle the denialism, because it's going to happen no matter what. But it's just the I have no easy answers there. I wish I
Yeah,
did.
yeah. It's not an easy subject, that's for sure. Mm.
I
Yeah.
I also think I mean I've talked a lot about what's been happening in British Columbia, and I think the important thing is most of British Columbia isn't under a treaty. Like you have Treaty 8 up north, and but this has meant that the First Nations and Indigenous peoples living in what is now British Columbia have, I think, been able to work together in a way that has made it kind of interesting. because they're not bound by the treaties. I mean, some people love to say we're all treaty people. No, that's not entirely true. There's a lot of the country known as Canada isn't under a treaty, and I'll be interested to see how this unfolds. I mean, there are a lot of interesting legal developments.
Um,
Like the Daniels decision, like we don't really know what it means, and it's going to take a long time for us to um, uh, suss that out.
um, could could you speak a little bit about the Wet'suwet'en camps trying to stop the well now new pipeline, and how that intersects with land back coverage?
Yes, I think it speaks again to the inadequacy of the duty to consult, right? Which is like a legal, the checking of a box, and there are. It's sort of a sham, I think. There's a great book called Indigenous Rights in 50 Minutes. Or no, no, Indigenous Rights in 1 minute or less. And it kind of answers very specific questions about things like this. And
Hmm.
um, I would recommend that book actually, just because it goes into, but mind you, it's all from a Aboriginal, from a legal point of view.
Hmm.
And that's also not, it's not as problematic, but I mean, there's so many different ways of looking at it. But because um, Parliament and the courts haven't acted in good faith, as it were, it means that Indigenous people have had to litigate, and uh, that's very expensive. It's you know it's what they've been forced to do, and I wish that there was another process. Like it's just ridiculous that the courts seem to be the only way of doing this. Like
Yeah.
I wish that was, but I also think what I was going to say. I remember, um, we have so many mythology in Canada. As these peacekeepers, uh, but I think maybe the most effective thing for Indigenous journalists is to publish in media outlets outside of Canada. I think there's something to be said for that. I think to embarrass the country by publishing in things like The Guardian, the New York Times, Canadians hate to see their dirty laundry aired. And I think that there's something to be said by an effort by Indigenous journalists to publish uh, outside of the country, to shame Canada. And I think that should be kind of like a movement in and of itself, because it's it's so much of the myth of Canada is built on a lie, and by publishing articles abroad, I think it does have an impact actually, sadly. Like, and,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that's why films like the documentary Sugarcane did so well and was nominated for an Oscar, and things like that. I think that's crucial to embarrass the state on an international stage. Sadly,
Yeah, no, it's a super powerful recommendation. And one I don't think that we hear a whole bunch, you
well,
know?
I said it first, so
Okay. No.
like I mean, this is like like a completely different issue. But when Mordecai Richler published an article about Quebec
Mm,
separatism, the fact that he did it in the New Yorker, I think, is what a lot of people got very upset about.
mhm,
If he had published it, let's say in the Globe and Mail, it wouldn't have had nearly as big an impact. And
mhm.
and I'm not saying whether I agree with him or not or anything like that. I'm just saying that was a huge uh, reason that it had the reaction it did.
Yeah. No, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
I love that. I come from a theater background, and
I think
uh,
you've been at Crow's Theater. I think I've seen you at Crow's.
oh yeah, I was in a couple of plays there. Yeah, Julius Caesar and another one. And I also ran Native Earth Performing Arts. And 15 years ago, we couldn't get our plays into any mainstream theater in Canada, knocking on the doors. And then as soon as we were headlining the largest arts festival in the world in Sydney, Australia, and we knew this. So there was an Aboriginal theater company. We're like, oh my God, we could present you in Canada. And they're like, you can present us
Yeah.
because they were having the same things there. They couldn't get into any mainstream theaters. And then once we presented each other, of course, they'd take our calls now. Whether we wanted to or not, we were now in a position to do that.
Yeah,
And
it's
it
so
was
Canadian.
yeah, and it was so effective. Like,
Yeah.
and I hadn't taken that mental jump
Mhm.
to see the similarities in journalism as well. It's
It's
so
like
powerful.
it's like when Connie Walker won the Pulitzer Prize for her
Yeah.
podcast, in the States.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it was huge.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna call it there, everyone. Thank you so, so much for being here. I would usually tell you to stay tuned for the next one, but this is the last one in the series. If you would like to watch more, watch others of the series, they are, and this one will be on YouTube, on JHR's YouTube in January, but all of the others in the series from earlier this year are there now. And yeah, just that. Once again, thank you so, so much for being here. And thank you so much, Trevor, for coming and
Thank you.
speaking
It's
with
been
us
an
today.
absolute pleasure.
Mm.